My name is Faith Foster. I'm 33 years old, and for 5 years my mom introduced me to our family as a waitress, not an electrician, not a business owner, a waitress. And, after her second glass of Chardonnay, the family disappointment. This past September, an invitation landed on my workbench in Columbus. Cream paper, gold script. It smelled faintly of her perfume. Sharon Foster, 60th birthday, October the 14th, and the whole family was expected. 40 guests, one rented hall, and a version of me that my mother invented. What she said in front of those 40 guests, and what I handed her right after, ended a lie 14 years in the making. But here's what none of them knew. 3 days after that party, my mother was set to lose everything she had, and I was the only person alive who could stop it. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where quiet women stop apologizing for the lives they built, and the truth always finds the light switch. If this story finds you somewhere familiar, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe, because you will want to hear how this one ends. The invitation sat on my workbench for a week before my phone rang. I run an electrical contracting company on the east side of Columbus, 28 employees, 12 vans. That morning, I was elbow deep in a bid for a hospital wing when Aunt Carol's name lit up the screen. Carol is my mother's older sister, and the only person in our family who calls me at work like I have a job. "Faithy," she said, "tell me you got the invitation." I said I got it. She let the silence sit there, the way she does. "Your mother's turning 60, she finally said. "Whatever this is between you two, bury it for one night. One dinner. You can go back to hating each other by Sunday." I told her I didn't hate my mother. That was true. And it was also the most complicated sentence I own. "Then come early," Carol said. "The hall's floodlights are shot and the rental company wants $400 to look at them. You're handy." Handy. I bid $2 million jobs, and to my family, I am handy. I said yes anyway, and my hand was tight around the phone when I said it. Here is the detail I chewed on for the next 3 days. The invitation came from Carol. She addressed it, she stamped it, she mailed it. My mother never asked for me. My mother, as far as I knew, was perfectly happy with the story she'd been telling everyone since I was 28. That her daughter waited tables somewhere in the city, that it was a shame about me, that some kids just don't turn out. I loaded my tools that Thursday and drove 90 minutes back to Millbrook, toward the woman who invented me. To explain what happened at that party, I have to take you back to a garage that smelled like copper wire and coffee. My dad, Ray Foster, was an electrician. One man, one white van with blue letters, Foster Electric, and a reputation in 3 counties for never cutting a corner. I was 12 the first time he let me wire a practice panel he'd mounted on plywood. He stood behind me with his arms crossed, watching me strip 14-gauge wire with hands too small for the tool. "Slow is smooth," he'd say. "Smooth is fast." Saturdays in that garage were the best education I ever got. He taught me that electricity is honest. It does exactly what the person who installed it deserves. He taught me to respect load, to label everything, to never trust a wire I hadn't tested myself. And once, when I asked him why he never put his name on a bigger sign, he wiped his hands on a rag and said the sentence I have carried my whole life. "Load-bearing walls don't ask to be noticed, Faith." Then he winked and went back to work, like he hadn't just handed me a religion. My mother watched all of this from the porch. She'd bring out lemonade, set it on the step, and go back inside. In all those years of Saturdays, she never once came into the garage. She loved my father. I want to be fair about that. But she loved him in a pressed shirt, church pew way, and the garage embarrassed her. I thought it was the grease. It took me 20 more years to understand it was the calluses. I should have understood it then, standing on that porch line between them. It would have saved me a decade. My dad died on a Tuesday in March, 14 years ago, kneeling in front of a breaker panel at the county fairgrounds. His heart gave out at 51. He'd been feeling tired for months and treating it with black coffee, Because men like my father don't take mornings off. I was 19, a sophomore in electrical engineering at Ohio State, the first foster ever to get that far. Then the paperwork started, and the paperwork told the truth the way paperwork does. His life insurance was small. The van had a lien on it. The house on Maple Street had a second mortgage I'd never heard of, and the checking account had less in it than my meal plan. Somebody had to work, and my brother Nathan was 22 and buried in pharmacy school, the family's official investment. So one night I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and did the math out loud. Tuition on one side, groceries and mortgage on the other. My mother sat across from me with her hands folded, and I waited for her to fight me on it. To say, finish the semester, we'll find a way. Your father would want it. She didn't. She looked at the legal pad for a long moment, and then she said, just don't tell anyone at church yet. Not don't do it. Don't tell anyone. I remember the refrigerator humming. I remember thinking I must have misheard her, that grief scrambles people. I withdrew that Friday. And the thing I know now, that I refused to know then, is that my mother buried two things that march: her husband and the version of her daughter she could brag about. Only one of them got a headstone. For the next few years, I waited tables at a steakhouse off the interstate, and I want to be clear about something. It was good, hard, honest work, and the tips kept the lights on at 214 Maple Street. My mother told people I was figuring things out. What I was figuring out was an application to the Electricians Union Apprenticeship Program, which I filled out on a break room table during my double shifts. 5 years of training, paid while you learn. At 20, I got in, one of 2 women in a class of 40. And I drove to Millbrook on a Sunday to tell my mother over pot roast, because I thought, God help me, that she'd be proud. She set down her fork. She looked at me the way you look at a stain on good carpet. An electrician, she said, testing the word. Like your father. I said yes, exactly like my father. And my mother, with the pot roast steaming and Nathan's framed pharmacy degree already hanging gold and centered in the living room behind her, smoothed the tablecloth and said, in this family, we hang diplomas, not aprons. Nathan studied his plate like it owed him money. Nobody said anything else. That sentence had a whole cosmology inside it, and I would spend the next decade learning its rules. Rule 1, it is better to look successful than to be solvent. Rule 2, a daughter's job is to be presentable. Rule 3, there is a kind of work this family climbs on, and a kind it climbs away from, and my father and I were the latter. Within a year, I heard from a cousin that Mom was telling the aunts I was still waitressing. Still, like a chronic condition, like something you catch. People always ask the same question, why didn't you just tell everyone the truth? I did. Twice. Learn from me. The first year my company existed, I mailed my mother a brochure. Glossy paper, our fleet of vans lined up, my name printed at the bottom. Faith Foster, owner. I thought paper would work on her, since paper was the only currency she respected. It came back in 9 days, unopened, the envelope not even slit. She'd written on a sticky note, in her looping church bulletin cursive, please stop confusing your aunts. That was all. The second time was at my Uncle Pete's funeral, 2 years later. Aunt Carol's husband, a good man who once lent Dad his truck for a month and never mentioned it. At the reception, my cousin Denise asked, loudly and kindly, if I was still at the restaurant, and I was tired, so I told the truth. I own an electrical company, I said. 22 employees at the time. We just wired the new elementary school in Grove City. And my mother materialized out of the casserole line with tears already standing in her eyes and said, Faith, honey, please. Not today, of all days. Then, softer, to Denise. She embellishes. It's been hard since her father. She dabbed her eyes and everyone looked at me, the daughter making scenes at a funeral, upsetting a widow who had buried a husband and was now watching her sister bury one too. You cannot fact-check a crying mother. There is no paperwork for that. Whatever I said next would only prove her story, so I said nothing, and the silence notarized it. So I stopped correcting the record. I built things instead. Quietly. That was my first mistake, and it took 5 more years to invoice me for it. Here's what quiet looks like, spread over 9 years. Journeyman card at 24. Master electrician license at 28. The same year, I signed a lease on a garage bay with 2 used vans and a coffee maker that only worked if you threatened it. I named the company Foster and Daughter Electric. People assume the name runs father to child, some proud old man handing down the business, and I let them assume it. The truth runs the other direction. Dad's company died with him in front of that breaker panel. Naming mine after him was how I dragged it back out of the ground. His name riding on every door of every van, in the same blue his van wore. By last year, we were 28 people and $3.4 million in contracts. Schools, clinics, a hospital wing, and one job I never told my mother about, because God has a sense of humor, and so does the bidding process. 14 months ago, the First Methodist Church of Millbrook, my mother's church, the pews she has polished her reputation on for 40 years, caught fire from 60-year-old aluminum wiring in the fellowship hall. Nobody hurt. The rebuild committee took bids for the electrical, and my estimator flagged it as a solid municipal adjacent job, and we won it. I stayed off the site, sent my best crews, kept my name on the paperwork as F. Foster, which everyone reads as a man. If the name ever snagged on her, she never showed it. Foster is half the phone book in that county, and in her cosmology, her daughter carried trays. My mother sat on that rebuild committee. For 3 months she walked past my vans, my people, my father's name in blue letters, and never saw a thing. Aunt Carol told me later that Mom bragged about the crew to her book club. Such a professional outfit, she said. She had no idea she was complimenting her disappointment. By this fall, I had one dream left with a price tag on it. The old Hartwell building on Parsons Avenue. Brick, 1920s, 11,000 square feet of dead department store that I wanted to fill with training benches. A trade school. The Foster and Daughter Training School, teaching kids like me, the broke ones, the dropouts, the ones nobody frames pictures of, how to bend conduit, and read a panel schedule and earn a life with their hands. I had $158,000 saved for the down payment, 5 years of skipped vacation sitting in an account I never touched. The seller wanted to close by the end of October. I had the letter of intent drafted. My dad's name was finally going on a wall too big to mail back. That was my October. And in the middle of it sat my mother's birthday, like a breaker I didn't want to touch. 5 years of being the family disappointment teaches you the choreography. The kids' table at Thanksgiving at 31 years old, cousins asking if I was still waitressing while their husbands asked me, unironically, to look at their flickering hallway light. I could have skipped the party. I'd skipped things before, and the sky stayed up. But Carol had asked, and Carol never asks for anything twice, and some stubborn foster gene wanted to stand in that hall one last time before my real life started. One night, I told myself, driving west on I-70 with my tools rattling behind me. One night, then the Hartwell closing, then finally a life with my own name on it. The universe heard that and smiled. Because what I found in Millbrook that week wasn't a party. It was a house fire, the slow kind, and everyone I loved was still inside. I got to Millbrook 2 weeks and change before the party. Carol's chore list had a way of multiplying, and checked into the Hillside Motel, because staying at my mother's house stopped being an option years ago, and both of us pretend that's normal. Thursday afternoon I drove past 214 Maple Street slow, the way you'd read an old report card. From the curb, the house was perfect. Hedges squared off, porch swept. The lawn edged so clean it looked drawn with a ruler. A lawn service does that, and lawn services cost money. But I grew up in that house, and I read houses for a living. The paint on the south side, behind the gutters, was peeling in sheets. One downspout was rusted through and somebody had aimed it away from the foundation with a paver stone, a 50-cent fix for a $5,000 problem. The garage roof had a tarp corner showing under the shingles, tucked back where the street couldn't see it. A house with a perfect face and a rotting back is a house performing for somebody. Friday morning I went to the rental hall to look at the floodlights Carol wanted fixed, and that told me more. The shot floodlights were fine. The wiring feeding them was the problem. Somebody had run a cheap extension line through a junction box with no cover, a shortcut job, the kind of thing you do when the quote scares you. I fixed it in an hour with parts from my van. But standing on that ladder, I kept thinking about the tarp and the downspout and the paver stone. Somebody in my mother's tidy world had been cutting corners for a long time, quietly, exactly where nobody looks. And I know better than anyone alive what my family does with things it doesn't want seen. You have to understand what my mother built, to understand what she was terrified of losing. Sharon Foster is a widow of 14 years who turned widowhood into a career. Rebuild Committee at First Methodist, treasurer of the book club that meets at Linda Pruitt's house. And if you don't know a Linda Pruitt, she is the town's radio station, broadcasting on all frequencies, no off switch. My mother hosts the committee brunch every spring, real tablecloths, the good china that only she is allowed to wash. In Millbrook, being Sharon Foster means something, and what it means is, that woman held it together. Husband dropped dead and she never missed a Sunday, never let the hedges go, raised a pharmacist. The town gave her a title, Strong Widow, and she has paid its dues in casseroles and appearances for 14 straight years. Saturday, helping Carol haul folding chairs, I watched Mom hold court on the hall's front walk with Linda and two committee women, laughing with her head tipped back, wearing pressed slacks on a Saturday. She saw me carrying chairs and gave me the nod she gives the caterer. Fine, I know my role in this production. But that evening, loading Carol's van, my aunt looked back at the hall and said something that stuck in me like a splinter. 60 years old? Carol said, half to herself. And God knows how she keeps that house on nothing. I asked what she meant by nothing. Carol suddenly got very busy with a chair strap. Your father's insurance, I mean. It wasn't much. She stretches it. Carol is a bad liar and knows it, which is why she started the van. I stood in the parking lot with a folding chair in each hand, doing math I didn't like. My brother Nathan showed up Sunday to help set up the tent for the overflow seating, and Nathan does not do tents. He's a pharmacist in Dayton, 2 kids, a good lawn, the family's finished product. We're not enemies, my brother and me. We're something worse. Polite. He hugged me with one arm and told me I looked good, and then he spent 2 hours being somewhere else. He checked his phone the way a man checks a wound. Twice he walked out past the hedges to take calls, and both times he came back wearing a face he'd built in the driveway. I helped him tension the tent lines, and up close he looked gray, the color of a man who isn't sleeping. Work? I asked. Sure, he said. Sure. The third call came while we were coiling rope, and he didn't walk away fast enough. I heard it. Not the words, the cadence. A read-off-a-screen voice, the kind that says, your call may be recorded, and my brother saying, I understand. Is there any flexibility on the date? You hear that tone once in your life, and you never forget it. I'd heard it at 19, on our kitchen phone, negotiating with my dead father's creditors between waitressing shifts. Banks don't call pharmacists on Sunday about prescriptions. Nathan pocketed the phone and picked up the rope, and I looked at my brother, the good one, the framed one, the investment, and had a thought that felt like touching a live wire. He knows something about this family that I don't. 14 years of being the outsider had one advantage. I knew exactly what our family looked like when it was hiding something. It looked busy. It looked polite. It looked exactly like this. Monday afternoon, Mom needed her porch light fixed before the out-of-town cousins arrived, and Carol volunteered me before I could open my mouth. So I was alone in my childhood hallway, tracing a dead circuit to the fuse panel, when I opened the hall console drawer looking for the spare fuses Dad always kept there. Muscle memory. 15 years since I'd lived in that house, and my hand still knew the drawer. The fuses were there. So was the mail. A stack of envelopes 4 inches tall, rubber-banded, shoved to the back under a church directory. First Millbrook Savings. Over and over, the same return address in the corner like a drumbeat. Some opened, some not. The open ones were worse. I know I shouldn't have read them. I also know that you, sitting wherever you're sitting, would have read them too. Home equity line of credit. Opened 8 years ago. Original draw, $90,000. Current balance with accrued interest, $149,000. The words past due stamped in red that doesn't photograph well on good china. Minimum payments made, then partial payments, then a letter dated this spring that used the phrase maturity date, and a number that made my chest go cold. The balance was due in full. My mother had been borrowing against my father's house for 8 years, against the paint she wasn't buying and the roof she was tarping. Borrowing to stay Sharon Foster. The lawn service, the committee brunches, the checks to the church rebuild fund, the good china economy of a woman keeping up a kingdom on a dead man's equity. I stood in the hallway holding a fuse in one hand and the wreckage of her secret in the other, and out front, her book club laughed about centerpieces. I walked out to the driveway, held up one of the envelopes, and watched my brother, age 5 years, standing still. "How long have you known?" I said. Quiet voice. The book club was 20 feet and one window away. Nathan glanced at the house and steered me behind his SUV like we were 16 again, hiding report cards. "Since spring?" he said. She missed the maturity date and called me in a panic, then swore me to secrecy. She put me on the account as an authorized contact so I could talk to the bank for her. "Faith, I've been trying. I refinanced my own car. I sent what I could." And then it all came out of him in the driveway, in the tone of a man who has been rehearsing a confession he hoped never to give. The line of credit was 8 years old. Mom drew it down slow. The lawn service, the assessments, Christmas, appearances. When Dad's insurance ran dry, the house became her salary. "There's something else," Nathan said, and he looked at the gravel. "The property taxes, the money you've been sending through me, every year, 6 years. I already knew from his face, but I made him say it. She thinks it's mine. She'd ask where the money came from, Faith. What was I supposed to tell her? That her waitress daughter?" He stopped himself, but the sentence finished itself just fine. "She thinks it's mine. 6 years of my quiet money, and my brother had let our mother believe he was the one holding the roof up. He never corrected her at a single dinner, never once, while she toasted her son the provider and seated me by the kitchen door. "You should hate me," he said. I looked at my brother and felt something worse than hate. I felt recognition. "No," I said. "You're just fluent in her language." There was one envelope in that stack Mom hadn't opened. Certified mail, signature line signed in her tidy cursive. So she'd accepted it at the door and then buried it under a church directory, which is my mother's entire filing system for reality. Nathan and I opened it together on the tailgate of his SUV, like diffusing something. It was worse than the rest. Notice of foreclosure sale. Legal language stacked like cinder blocks, and in the middle of it, a date in bold. The property at 214 Maple Street would be sold at sheriff's auction on October 17th. I read it twice. Then I took out my phone and looked at the invitation Carol had mailed me because I needed to see the 2 dates side by side to believe them. The party, October 14th. The auction, October 17th. My mother was going to stand in a rented hall in pressed slacks, raise a glass with 40 guests under lights I had fixed for free, and celebrate 60 years of Sharon Foster. And 72 hours later, the county was going to sell my father's house off the courthouse steps. Nathan kept saying, "We have time. There are programs. I'll call Monday." The way people talk when the math has already eaten them. I wasn't listening. I was standing in the driveway where Dad taught me to back a trailer, holding the date in my hands. October 17th. 3 days after the party. I want you to hold on to that date the way I did, because every single thing that happens for the rest of this story happens against that clock. That night at the motel, I laid the invitation and the notice side by side on the bedspread and sat there a long time, listening to the interstate hum like a loaded neutral. Tuesday, I tried to hand my mother a door out, without letting her see I'd found the drawer. I came by to finish the porch light while she polished silverware for a party she couldn't afford, and I kept my voice easy. "Big house for one person," I said. "Lot of upkeep." "A friend of mine downsized last year," I said. "Best thing she ever did. Bought a nice condo near her grandkids, no gutters to think about." My mother polished a serving spoon like it had personally insulted her. "I'm not moving to a condo, Faith." I said nobody said condo, I said smaller. I said houses get heavy, there's no shame in setting one down. And I watched her spine assemble itself, vertebra by vertebra, into the posture she wears at church. "Do you know what this town would say?" she said. "If Sharon Foster sold her house, they'd say she couldn't manage. They'd say Ray left her with nothing." She set the spoon down in its velvet slot like she was laying it to rest. "This family hangs diplomas, not aprons, and it does not hang for sale signs." There it was. The whole religion in one sentence, same as it was over the pot roast 12 years ago, except now I could hear what it actually was. Not cruelty, doctrine. She would rather drown than be seen swimming hard, because in her world, the being seen is the drowning. I finished the light. She held the ladder, and for one strange minute we were almost a team, her hand steadying the aluminum, me above her in the dusk. "You always were good with your hands," she said, and she meant it kindly, and that was the saddest part of the whole afternoon. That night, Carol found me at the motel with a 6-pack of ginger ale and the truth. She sat on the plastic chair outside my door, and out of nowhere she said, "You know she was almost a nurse." I said no. Nobody had ever told me any of this. "Nursing school in Columbus, class of '88, Carol said. She was top of her class after the first year. Then Nathan came along a little ahead of schedule." Carol turned the can in her hands. "Our mother drove up, packed Sharon's dorm room into the Buick, and got her a cashier job at the pharmacy in town. Told her married girls with babies don't need diplomas. And when Sharon cried, and she cried for a week, Faithy, our mother said, 'A diploma is the only thing they can't take away from you. Now you'll never have one.'" The parking lot was quiet except for the ice machine. "She's been trying to graduate ever since," Carol said. "Through Nathan, through the committees, through whatever this thing is she does with you. I want to be careful here, because understanding is not the same as excusing, and I refuse to hand my mother's cruelty a doctor's note. But sitting on that curb, I finally saw the wiring. My grandmother put a sentence into a 24-year-old girl like a nail into wet concrete, and the concrete set, and 35 years later, that girl was still standing in the shape of it, introducing her daughter as a waitress, because a daughter with calluses proved the sentence right, and the sentence could never, ever be allowed to be right about her own house. My mother wasn't the author of the story that was eating us. She was its longest-running victim. She just never stopped charging admission. Back in the room, I did what Fosters do at kitchen tables and motel desks. I made 2 columns on a legal pad. Left column, the Hartwell Building. $158,000 saved for the down payment, letter of intent drafted, closing set for the end of October, my father's name going on a wall. Right column, a foreclosure notice with a balance of $149,000 and change, plus legal fees, plus the interest meter still running. The 2 numbers sat there staring at each other like they knew. I called Rachel Kim at 9 that night. Rachel's been my company's attorney since we were 4 vans and a prayer, and she answers her phone because I never abused the privilege. I told her all of it. She was quiet for a second. Then she went to work the way good lawyers do. No drama, just doors. "Forget the auction," she said. "Auctions are loud and you can lose. If First Millbrook is holding that note 8 years past origination and 12 months delinquent, they don't want the house. They want it off their books. So we don't buy the house, Faith. We buy the debt. Buy the note, take assignment of the mortgage, cancel the sale, and the whole thing stays inside a filing cabinet instead of on the courthouse steps. Clean, legal, fast. and total. Every dollar of Hartwell gone into my mother's drowned equity. I sat with the pen over the legal pad, and my father's voice came up through 14 years of floorboards. Load-bearing walls don't ask to be noticed. Right, Dad. But you never told me the other half. Maybe they should stop hiding inside the drywall too. Maybe the hiding was never humility. Maybe it was just a smaller way of being ashamed. Before I tell you what I decided, I want to know something. Honestly. If you have ever quietly paid a bill for someone who was ashamed of you, if you've kept a family's lights on from the cheap seats, tell me in the comments, because I spent years thinking I was the only one, and I've since learned we are an entire silent nation. And subscribe, because what I did next, my family still talks about in 2 different versions, and you're about to get the true one. Here's what I decided, alone in room 14 of the Hillside Motel, at 1 a.m, with a legal pad and a ginger ale going flat. I decided the house doesn't get sold on the courthouse steps. Not that house. Not the garage where my father taught me that slow is smooth. Not sold off in front of Linda Pruitt's whole radio audience while my mother's church friends drive past the sign. And I decided something else, and this one took longer, staring at the water stain on the motel ceiling. I wasn't going to do it the old way. The old way was 6 years of tax money laundered through my brother's good name, help with the serial numbers filed off, love disguised as Nathan so it would be allowed in the building. The old way kept everyone comfortable except me. So, I would buy my mother's debt. All of it. With the money I'd bled 5 years to save. And this time it would have my name on it. My real name. The one on the vans. I didn't know yet how she'd find out, or when, or what it would cost past the money. I just knew the era of anonymous faith died in that motel room. I slept 4 hours and woke up strangely light. Wednesday morning, 13 days before the auction, Rachel called First Millbrook Savings and asked for whoever handled distressed assets, which at a bank that size is one tired man named Doug with a nameplate and a golf calendar. Rachel didn't mention my mother and didn't need to. She said she represented a private holding company interested in taking a non-performing residential note off their hands before the 17th. Cash, as is. No contingencies. You could practically hear Doug sit up straight through the phone. Small banks hate foreclosures. The auction costs them legal fees. The house sells soft. The paperwork drags into next quarter, and examiners circle the file like crows. A cash buyer for the note is Christmas in October. We used F&D Holdings, LLC, a company Rachel had set up 2 years back to hold our garage bay and yard. Boring on purpose. Its paperwork a locked door with nothing interesting behind it. By Thursday afternoon, Doug had come back with a payoff figure, $158,000, covering balance, accrued interest, and their legal costs to date. Sign within 48 hours and they'd assign the mortgage, hand over the note, and file to cancel the sheriff's sale. Rachel walked me through the stack like a surgeon narrating. Note purchase agreement, assignment of mortgage, allonge, cancellation filing. Dry words that meant one wet thing. Whoever signed the bottom line would own the debt on 214 Maple Street, with the power to forgive it, restructure it, or burn the whole thing down. You understand what you're trading, Rachel said. It wasn't really a question. The Hartwell seller wanted his answer by Friday, too. Same 48 hours, 2 doors, 1 key, and the key was every dollar I had. Send the papers, I said. Friday morning, I sat in my truck outside the Millbrook branch and made 2 phone calls, in an order I chose very deliberately, because I knew if I made them the other way around, I might not make the second one. The first was to the Hartwell broker. I withdrew my letter of intent. He was decent about it. Said the building had waited 80 years, it could wait for me a little longer, which we both knew was a kindness and not a market analysis. 11,000 square feet of my father's name, and I let it go on a Friday morning in a bank parking lot, watching a man inside water a ficus. Then I called Rachel and said wire it. $158,000 to First Millbrook Savings, which took my Hartwell fund down to the studs, plus $9,000 out of my personal emergency account for the filing costs and Rachel's fees, because irony has a punch clock. At 11:42 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Wire confirmed. That was the whole ceremony. No music, a parking lot, a ficus, a text message, and on the other side of it, a different world. F&D Holdings now owned the note and mortgage on 214 Maple Street. The sheriff's sale was canceled by filing that afternoon. My mother's house was safe, and my mother had no idea, and the trade school was gone, and there was no undoing any single part of it. Assignment of record is a public document in the county books. Anonymous faith was now a legal fiction with a paper trail. I sat in the truck for a while. I'd like to tell you it felt noble. Mostly it felt like giving blood. Necessary, draining, and quieter than you'd expect. 3 days later, a letter with my company's name on it landed in my mother's mailbox. The cost didn't hit at the bank. Costs never hit at the register. They hit in the aisles. Later, when you see the thing you put back. Saturday, I drove home to Columbus to check on the shop and swap out gear, and I made the mistake of taking Parsons Avenue. The Hartwell building stood there with its big dead windows and the ghost sign for a department store that closed before I was born, and the broker's lockbox still on the door. I pulled over. I'd walked that floor 11 times in 6 months. I knew where the benches would have gone, where I'd have hung the panel boards, 16 stations, a classroom in the old mezzanine with Dad's name in blue over the stairs. Some other buyer would get it now. A storage company, probably, or a gym for people with better luck. Tyler, my foreman, caught me in the yard that afternoon and asked when we were signing on the school, because half my crew had already volunteered to teach nights. Tyler apprenticed under me. He has a kid and a mortgage because a stranger once took a chance on his hands. I looked at him and heard myself say, "Not this year." He didn't push. Good foremen read faces like blueprints. But he stood there an extra second, and something in me wanted badly to explain, to say I hadn't lost my nerve, that the money wasn't gone, it was just wearing a different address. I didn't. Old habits keep their own counsel. That night, I ate dinner standing up at my kitchen counter, 33 years old, richer than my whole family tree, and owning approximately nothing again. And I laughed once, out loud, at the shape of it. Then I drove back toward Millbrook, because there was still a party coming. Here's the part I didn't see and had to piece together after, from Nathan and from Carol, the way you reconstruct an outage from scorch marks. Monday, 5 days before the party, my mother opened her mailbox and found a letter from F&D Holdings, LLC. Formal notice. The note and mortgage on her property had been assigned to a new holder. The foreclosure sale scheduled for October 17th was canceled pending review of the account. There was a Columbus P.O. box and Rachel's firm's number for inquiries. To me, that letter was mercy in a windowed envelope. To my mother, it was a shark fin. She called Nathan at his pharmacy, twice before noon. Who is F&D? What do they want with my house? Nathan, who could smell the answer from 30 miles away but wasn't sure yet, said maybe it's good news, Ma. Canceled is a good word. She wouldn't hear it. Banks she understood. Banks send calendars at Christmas. But a company, a nothing name with initials, buying her debt 3 days before the auction? Nobody buys a stranger's trouble out of kindness, she told him, and you should sit with the fact that my mother believed that sentence with her whole heart because it explains everything you need to know about her and about the house I grew up in. She spent that week polishing silverware for 40 guests, convinced a faceless company was circling her kingdom. She was half right. It had a face. She'd been introducing it as a waitress for 5 years. Nathan is not stupid. Wednesday night, he sat down with the county recorder's website because assignments of mortgage are public record if you know where to click, and pharmacists are professionally excellent at reading fine print. The assignment listed F&D Holdings, LLC, and below the notary block, a signature, Faith Foster, member. He called me at 10 p.m. I was in the motel parking lot, eating drive-thru. F&D, he said, Foster and daughter. You bought Mom's mortgage. Nothing in his voice I could use to steer by, flat as a hallway. I said yes. Silence, long enough that I checked the screen. Then, Quieter than I'd heard my brother since Dad's funeral. With what? Faith? That had to be everything. The school money, I said. There it is, he said, and laughed the way you laugh at a hospital. Then the pharmacist in him took over and he got to the interaction warning. You have to tell her. If she finds out from the paperwork, or from some clerk's cousin, Faith, it'll be the funeral all over again, except this time she'll say you did it to humiliate her. You know she will. Tell her, or I will. And there it was. The last exit off the old road, closing. 6 years of anonymous was over no matter what I chose now. I'll tell her after her birthday, I said. Let her have the party. She paid enough for it. Nathan exhaled. 3 days, Faith. Everything in my family had a countdown on it that October. The night before the party, Carol dragged me to the hall for final setup, and I got to watch my mother direct a dress rehearsal for an audience of folding chairs. She walked the room with a printed seating chart, adjusting place cards a 1/4 inch at a time. Head table, Nathan, his wife, the kids. Pastor and his wife, to her right. Linda Pruitt close enough to see everything, far enough to feel honored. I found my own name at table 6, in the corner by the kitchen door, between a great-uncle's hearing aid and the coffee station. Table 6 is where you seat the caterer's cousin. I stood there holding the little card with my name in her cursive, and I'll be honest with you, I almost drove home. 90 minutes, door locked, phone off, let October 17th be a thing that quietly didn't happen, and let her wonder forever. Instead, I went out to the truck and opened my toolbox for no reason I could have explained. Top tray, where it always rides. My father's old multimeter, yellow case gone soft at the corners, his initials scratched on the back with an all. RF. I put it in my jacket pocket like a saint's medal, and then I took one business card out of the box in the console. Faith Foster, owner, master electrician, Foster and Daughter Electric, and slid it into the same pocket. Not a trophy. I want that understood. A key. Some doors you knock on, some you rewire. The hall looked genuinely beautiful, and I say that as the person who fixed its floodlights and knew what its wiring looked like under the makeup. Gold tablecloths, hydrangeas from somebody's garden dressed up to look like a florist's. 40 guests in their church best. Cousins from Toledo, the whole rebuild committee, Pastor Weller, Linda Pruitt in a blazer the color of a fire engine, positioned at center like a satellite dish, and my mother. I'll give her this forever. 60 looked good on her. Navy dress, pearl earrings, hair set that morning. She moved through that room like a woman with no unopened mail on earth, laughing at the right volume, touching elbows, being Sharon Foster harder than I'd ever seen her be Sharon Foster. Only twice did I catch the current under it. Once when the pastor asked after the house, and her smile held a half-second too long. Once when she glanced at the door, each time it opened, like she was expecting a process server with a bow on him. She was 60 years old and terrified in pearls, and I was the monster under her bed, standing by the coffee station with her debt in my jacket pocket. Carol swung by table 6 with 2 plates and parked herself next to me, uninvited. Which is Carol, for I love you. Behave, she said, watching Mom work the room. Always do, I said. She snorted into her sweet tea. Up front, Nathan tapped a fork against a glass, and the room began to turn. After the toasts, my mother did the thing she does at every family gathering, the thing I'd been seated through for 5 years, the tour of accomplishments. She stood at the head table with her glass of white wine and went around the room introducing her family to itself, because in her kingdom, saying a thing in public is what makes it true. My son Nathan, doctor of pharmacy. And Nathan raised a hand while the room applauded him for existing. His wife, the school board. The grandchildren, gifted. Both of them, obviously. The cousins got their promotions listed like scripture readings. It went on. Warm and practiced, and I watched her sail toward me along the room's edge the way you watch weather come across a field. And then she reached table 6. She looked at me, really looked, the first full eye contact of the night, and I watched something move behind her face. A half-second flicker. I know now what was in that half-second. A letter with initials on it. An auction date. A fear she couldn't say out loud in front of the pastor. Whatever it was, she reached for the oldest tool on her belt. She raised her glass a degree and said, in exactly the voice you'd use for It's a Shame About the Rain, "And this is Faith, the one who didn't finish college." Somebody's husband chuckled before he could catch it. Linda Pruitt's eyebrows performed a small, satisfied ceremony. 40 faces did the polite thing, which is nothing, which is worse. The coffee machine gurgled behind me. Carol's hand closed on my forearm under the table, a warning or a mercy I still don't know. I felt the old heat rise up my neck. 5 years of it. And then, I swear to you, it just stopped, like a breaker doing its one job. I smiled at my mother, and I reached into my jacket. I stood up. Not fast, not theatrical. I stood up the way you stand up when it's your stop. The room did that thing rooms do when the seated person moves at the wrong beat. Everything went a little quiet without deciding to. I walked the length of 2 tables to where my mother stood with her glass, and I could feel Linda Pruitt tracking me like sonar. Mom's chin came up, ready for a scene, hoping against a scene, already drafting how she'd describe the scene to the book club. I didn't make a scene. I said, "Happy birthday, Mom." And I took the business card out of my jacket and placed it gently in her free hand. That's all. White card, blue ink, raised letters. Faith Foster. Owner, Master Electrician, Foster and Daughter Electric, Columbus, Ohio. I watched her eyes go down to it. I watched her read it once and not understand it, the way you read a sentence in a language you studied long ago. And then I watched it land. In stages, like dominoes going over in slow motion. Foster and Daughter Electric. The blue letters she'd walked past for 3 months at the church rebuild, the professional outfit she'd bragged about to her book club. F and D, F and D Holdings, LLC, the letter in her kitchen drawer, the canceled auction. Her eyes came up to my face and I watched 60 years of certainty try to reorganize itself around a business card, and fail, and try again. Her lips parted. No sound came out. And then her wine glass slipped out of her hand and burst on the hardwood like a small bright bell, and 40 guests turned at once, and my mother stood in the wreckage of her own toast with my name in her hand. I leaned in close, so only she could hear me over the room. "We should talk in the kitchen, Mom." The hall kitchen was all steel counters and borrowed quiet, the caterer's trays steaming under foil, the door swinging shut on 40 conversations restarting at once out there. Carol's voice rising cheerfully about the cake, God bless her, covering our exit like artillery. My mother stood with her back to the prep table, holding my business card in both hands now, and came apart in layers, in order, like insulation stripping back. First the denial. "This is Nathan's doing. This is some kind of, you do not own an electrical company, Faith, you wait tables." Not even cruel, automatic, a catechism. I said nothing, and my nothing answered her. Then the fear, dropping her voice to a hiss, her eyes on the door. The letter, F and D. "Is that you? Is it you that bought—" She couldn't say the word mortgage. She gestured at it, a little circle in the air with the card. "My house?" I said yes. "It's me. It's been me for a while, Mom. In a lot of ways you don't know yet." And then came the one that told me everything, the layer under all the other layers. Her chin started to shake, and she pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth, and she said, "You came here to watch me lose it, in front of Linda, in front of the pastor. You waited 5 years to—" She stopped, and what fell out of her next didn't even sound like her voice. It sounded borrowed, older, flatter, a Buick and dorm room voice. "They take everything from you eventually. That's what she always said. The only thing they can't take is the—" She caught herself on the word diploma, like a woman catching herself on a stair rail. I stood there, still as a wall, and let the silence hold her up. I took the folded papers out of my inside pocket and laid them on the steel counter, one at a time, in the order Rachel had clipped them. The filing that canceled the sheriff's sale, stamped by the county. And a lease. 214 Maple Street. Tenant Sharon Foster. Term life. Rent $1 per year. Nobody's taking your house, Mom. I bought the debt. All of it. It's done. Done last Friday, before you ever hung a streamer for this party. She looked at the papers the way a drowning woman looks at a rope she is positive is a snake, and I kept my voice level, because one of us had to be level, and it was finally going to be me. Out there, tonight, nothing happens. No announcement. No scene. Linda Pruitt goes home bored. As far as this town knows, the bank made an arrangement and Sharon Foster is fine. You'll be the widow who managed. Forever. I'm not here to take your kingdom. Then I put my hand flat on the papers, because she'd reached for them. It cost me the school, Mom. There was going to be a school, with Dad's name over the door, and I emptied it into this house instead. So you will never owe me $1, and I promise you'll never hear about it again. But you owe me one sentence. She went very still. Look at me, not at the door, at me, and say it out loud. My daughter builds things. She didn't finish college. She didn't need to. The steam trays ticked. Out in the hall, somebody laughed at somebody's toast. My whole childhood, I'd waited for her to say something like it on her own, volunteered, free. And standing in that kitchen, I finally understood that free was never coming. That walls can hold up a house for decades and still have to ask, once, out loud, to be seen. So I asked. The lease sat on the counter with my hand on it. My mother looked at the swinging door, and then at me, for a long, long time. She tried twice before it came. The first attempt died at my daughter, her voice cracking down the middle like old lath. The second got as far as builds and drowned. And then my mother, 60 years old that day, pearls trembling, my business card still folded in her fist, looked me in the eye and said it. All of it, slowly, like a woman walking on ice. My daughter builds things. She didn't finish college. A breath. She didn't need to. The last part came out barely above a whisper, and her face flinched around it as it passed, as if the sentence had edges. And I suppose it did. It had spent half a lifetime filed to a point somewhere inside her, aimed the other way. I won't dress this up for you. She didn't fall into my arms. There was no music. She wiped under one eye with a knuckle and straightened, and did something so perfectly her that I nearly laughed with an ache in it. She smoothed the lease flat on the counter, aligning its corners, making even her surrender presentable. Don't tell them tonight, she said. Let me tell it my way. That's the difference between us, Mom, I said, and there was no blade in it, just the plain fact at last. I never needed them to know. We walked back out through the swinging door 30 seconds apart, like a committee adjourning. Somebody had swept up the glass. My mother took a new one from the caterer's tray, and near the end of the evening, unprompted, she raised it and her voice, and said she wanted to finish the introductions properly. My daughter Faith, she said, and the half-second happened again, and went the other way this time. She owns her own company. A pause. She's very good. It wasn't the whole sentence. It was the first brick out of the wall, and I watched Linda Pruitt's eyebrows go up like semaphore flags, and I sat back down at table 6, next to the coffee machine, lighter than I'd been in 14 years. By the 1st of December, here's the accounting, because I promised you honest numbers. The lease is signed and recorded. My mother lives at 214 Maple Street for the rest of her life at $1 a year, and the first thing I did as her landlord was send a crew to fix the downspout, the garage roof, and every corner cut circuit in that house, invoice addressed to the owner, which is to say, to me. The town found out anyway, of course. County records are public, and Linda Pruitt's nephew works at the title office, and Millbrook's radio station has never once missed a broadcast. But here is the thing my mother never saw coming, the thing I'd suspected and couldn't have promised her. The story played backward from the one she'd feared her whole life. The church ladies were not scandalized. They were floored. The widow's waitress daughter turned out to own the company that rewired their church, and had quietly caught her mother's house as it fell. At Sunday coffee hour, women my mother had performed for since before I was born came up and gripped her hand and said, "Sharon, what a daughter." And my mother, "I have this from Carol, under oath of ginger ale," got a strange look for a second, and then straightened her spine and said, "She's always been gifted with her hands," which for Sharon Foster is roughly a ticker tape parade. She's in progress, my mother. At Thanksgiving, I sat at the main table. Nobody said anything about it, least of all me. She introduced me to a visiting cousin as my daughter, the electrician. Then added quietly, "She owns the company." Then, unable to help herself, she could still finish her degree online someday. For the resume. I let it go by like weather. Grandma's sentence doesn't die in 1 October. It just doesn't get to collect rent from me anymore. Nathan sends me a check every month. Small, regular, unasked. The first one came with a note that didn't hide behind his kids' school photos. Payment 1, for the taxes. I should have carried the name too. N. We had one long talk in his driveway in November, both of us leaning on his SUV like it was the old tailgate, and I told him the truth, which is that I understood him better than he wanted me to. He'd been paying for a wall spot in that living room his whole life. Turns out we were both financing the same museum. He's fluent in her language, my brother. But he's learning mine. The Hartwell building sold in December to a self-storage outfit, and I only allowed myself one slow drive past. Because here's what I figured out, somewhere between the motel legal pad and my mother's kitchen counter. I'd been waiting to start the school the way she waited to be seen, grandly, all at once, with a building worthy of the announcement. That was her religion talking through me. So we started small instead. In February, we glassed off the back corner of my own shop and hung a sign Tyler made in his garage. Foster and daughter. Training annex. 6 benches. 6 students. Nights and Saturdays. One of them is a 20-year-old named Brianna, who dropped out of Columbus State when her family's money fell through, and who strips 14-gauge wire with her jaw set exactly the way mine used to. My father's multimeter sits on the shelf above her bench, yellow case, his initials scratched in the back, still dead accurate. First thing I teach them is the first thing that ever made sense to me. A breaker trips to save the house. Cutting the current isn't failure. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps the whole thing from burning. My dad used to say load-bearing walls don't ask to be noticed, and he was right. But I'd add this, from the far side of that October. The day I stopped hiding inside the drywall was the day the whole house finally stood straight. A business card, a broken glass. One sentence that took my mother 60 years to say out loud. If this story sounded like your family, if you've been somebody's quiet wall, somebody's table 6, tell me your version in the comments because I read every single one, and there are more of us holding up more houses than anybody knows. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Hidden Family Revenge, because the quiet ones always have the best stories, and we are not finished telling them. I watched her eyes go down to it. I watched her read it once and not understand it, the way you read a sentence in a language you studied long ago. And then I watched it land. In stages, like dominoes going over in slow motion. Foster and daughter electric. The blue letters she'd walked past for 3 months at the church rebuild. The professional outfit she'd bragged about to her book club. F and D. F and D Holdings. LLC. The letter in her kitchen drawer. The canceled auction. Her eyes came up to my face and I watched 60 years of certainty try to reorganize itself around a business card. And fail, and try again. Her lips parted. No sound came out. And then her wine glass slipped out of her hand and burst on the hardwood like a small bright bell, and 40 guests turned at once, and my mother stood in the wreckage of her own toast with my name in her hand. I leaned in close, so only she could hear me over the room. "We should talk in the kitchen, Mom." The hall kitchen was all steel counters and borrowed quiet, the caterer's trays steaming under foil, the door swinging shut on 40 conversations restarting at once out there. Carol's voice rising cheerfully about the cake. God bless her, covering our exit like artillery. My mother stood with her back to the prep table, holding my business card in both hands now, and came apart in layers, in order, like insulation stripping back. First the denial. "This is Nathan's doing. This is some kind of, you do not own an electrical company, Faith, you wait tables." Not even cruel, automatic, a catechism. I said nothing, and my nothing answered her. Then the fear, dropping her voice to a hiss, her eyes on the door. "The letter. F and D. Is that you? Is it you that bought—" She couldn't say the word mortgage. She gestured at it, a little circle in the air with the card. "My house?" I said yes. "It's me. It's been me for a while, Mom. In a lot of ways you don't know yet." And then came the one that told me everything, the layer under all the other layers. Her chin started to shake, and she pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth, and she said, "You came here to watch me lose it, in front of Linda, in front of the pastor. You waited 5 years to—" She stopped, and what fell out of her next didn't even sound like her voice. It sounded borrowed, older, flatter, a Buick and dorm room voice. "They take everything from you eventually. That's what she always said. The only thing they can't take is the—" She caught herself on the word diploma, like a woman catching herself on a stair rail. I stood there, still as a wall, and let the silence hold her up. I took the folded papers out of my inside pocket and laid them on the steel counter, one at a time, in the order Rachel had clipped them. The filing that canceled the sheriff's sale, stamped by the county. And a lease. 214 Maple Street. Tenant Sharon Foster. Term life. Rent $1 per year. "Nobody's taking your house, Mom. I bought the debt. All of it. It's done. Done last Friday, before you ever hung a streamer for this party." She looked at the papers the way a drowning woman looks at a rope she is positive is a snake, and I kept my voice level, because one of us had to be level, and it was finally going to be me. Out there, tonight, nothing happens. No announcement. No scene. Linda Pruitt goes home bored. As far as this town knows, the bank made an arrangement and Sharon Foster is fine. You'll be the widow who managed, forever. I'm not here to take your kingdom. Then I put my hand flat on the papers, because she'd reached for them. "It cost me the school, Mom. There was going to be a school, with Dad's name over the door, and I emptied it into this house instead. So you will never owe me $1, and I promise you'll never hear about it again. But you owe me 1 sentence." She went very still. "Look at me, not at the door, at me, and say it out loud. My daughter builds things. She didn't finish college. She didn't need to." The steam trays ticked. Out in the hall, somebody laughed at somebody's toast. My whole childhood I'd waited for her to say something like it on her own, volunteered, free. And standing in that kitchen, I finally understood that free was never coming. That walls can hold up a house for decades and still have to ask, once, out loud, to be seen. So I asked. The lease sat on the counter with my hand on it. My mother looked at the swinging door, and then at me, for a long, long time. She tried twice before it came. The first attempt died at "my daughter," her voice cracking down the